They look like farms. That's because they are farms, and the prisoners live in dormitories and they work on the farm and they learn how to, I don't know, fix tractors. One place I went to, they were learning panel beating, and they sort out their drug issues. And the principle they go by is that they need to practice living in a community and being a trustworthy person. One of the photos is of I took in a Norwegian prison. It's of a knife, one of those magnetic knife blocks with sharp knives on the wall of the prison kitchen, which the prisoners use because, well, you know, they have to chop up their vegetables because they have to cook meals and share meals and do all of that kind of stuff.
Is that partly because the Scandinavians have better social services to begin with, whereas our prisoners, it's often said, tend to be stranded in society once they leave and cast...
Yes, and I think that's a really big issue. We've invested a lot in that sort of high security, maximum security facility, and not nearly as much in more or less anything else. And that's despite the fact that if you look at our prison population, if you look at on the Corrections website, yes, we have, so maximum security and high security prisoners are about 18% of the total. More than half are classified as either minimum security or low security. In anyone's book, if you're minimum or low security, that has to mean you're not a big threat to society and you need just a sort of minimum regime to keep you on the straight and narrow. But I think we're suffering from the fact that over, I don't know, the last 50 years, we haven't really invested in any alternative models, except for a few little pilots here and there.
Populations overseas are presumably just as concerned as we are about law and order and keeping the streets safe. So if the liberal and compassionate models work overseas, why do you think, John, we have such high incarceration rates traditionally?
Gosh, that's a big question. I think we have high incarceration rates. It's partly because we're not doing enough with prisoners while they are there, so that when they come back out, they can, as Mike was saying earlier, fit somewhere into normal life, into the workforce, get stable accommodation. And so I see a lot of guys in prison who have gone out on parole, and they have a number of conditions for that, but they get back out, they struggle to find a place to stay, they can't find a job, they're back to their old mates, and before you know it, they've breached one of their conditions and they're back inside.
Okay.
So, I mean, partly our problem is that we keep recycling. It should be a one-way street, but we haven't created the services, and partly what Mike was saying before about the attitudes of employers and fellow employees, they make a big difference in helping ex-offenders, and they don't need that much help sometimes, just to get back on track, get back in touch with their families and start being, accountable, trustworthy people once more.
All right, John, thank you very much. Dr. John Sinclair on the panel, and Mike Williams and Michelle Bogue have been with us today. Thank you both very much.
Pleasure.
Be interesting to hear about the success of your joint initiative. You heard it here first. We're back tomorrow. Thanks everybody for your company, and Checkpoint is coming right up.
No mai, haere mai, ki te whakarongo mai koe, ki te hotaka o te ahihahi. Good evening, this is Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. Coming up on tonight's programme, history is made on a cricket pitch in Ireland as a young New Zealander joins the ranks of the world's best. We have reaction to Amelia Kerr's world record. Winston Peters sides with Shane Jones in criticising Fonterra. We'll have political analysis on that and the view from the shareholders. How much will it cost to secure Christchurch's water supply? Waikeria Prison and that press conference with Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis. Our reporter Zach Fleming goes behind heavily locked doors to find out more. And speaking of closed entrances, the latest from Pike River. Also, what's coming up at the FIFA World Cup and a preview of the second All Blacks France test this weekend. All coming up on Checkpoint after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The National Party says New Zealand First is in open defiance of the Prime Minister, with its MPs attacking Fonterra. Both Winston Peters, who's Deputy Prime Minister, and Shane Jones, who's Regional Development Minister, have criticised the dairy giant and its chair. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the comments are personal opinions and do not reflect government policy. The National MP, Paul Goldsmith, says that's weasel words.
She can't control Shane Jones or the New Zealand First ministers, and that points to a fundamental weakness within the government. And it must be frustrating for her, but it is concerning for New Zealanders as a whole that the government has no coherence and internal discipline.
Paul Goldsmith won't comment on Fonterra's management. The planned re-entry to the mine's drift has narrowed to 3 options. Mining specialists, Pike River Recovery Agency staff and relatives of those killed in the 2010 mine blast are on the west coast for a second workshop on planning a manned re-entry of the mine drift. Now under consideration are a re-entry via the existing entrance, a second small tunnel that would need to be built, or a large borehole about 600 millimetres wide. Recovery Agency Chief Executive Dave Gawn is confident re-entry can begin later in the year and within budget.
We've done some broad brush planning in terms of costing, some rough orders of cost, but they are yet to be refined to a level that is something that we will actually put forward to the Minister.
The government has allocated up to $23 million to the project. 3 people remain in hospital, 1 critically and 2 seriously injured after a helicopter crash near Waioru this morning. 3 rescue helicopters were sent to Ngā Matea station in a remote part of the Kaweka Ranges at 10:30. Emma Hatton reports.
5 men were on board the helicopter, which was carrying out a commercial survey operation. Search and Rescue Mission Coordinator Dave Wilson says they were alerted by an emergency beacon, registered to a private company. They contacted the company, who quickly sent another of their choppers to Ngā Matea station, while emergency services were on the way.
The main part of the helicopter was upright, but it was pretty extensively damaged, and it was fairly clear early on that of the 5 people that were on board, 1 was in a critical condition, 2 were in serious condition, and 2 more had less serious injuries, but we were going to require some more medical response.
3 investigators from the Transport Accident Investigation Commission are on their way to the scene to try and figure out why the chopper crashed. This is Emma Hatton.
Air Chatham's which wants to fly between Paraparaumu and Auckland, will get local council funding, but it's not clear how much. This afternoon, the Kapiti Coast District Council voted to support the airline. Air New Zealand stopped flying the route in early April. The council had already agreed to put $150,000 towards marketing the route. The Kapiti Coast Mayor, Kei Guranathan, says he can't say how much more it's willing to spend.
Those details I cannot give you because it's under negotiations. So we have got a framework built up with maximum amounts and number of options, and he will take that with him.
Kei Guranathan says a decision will be made over the next few weeks. A local government expert says an investigation by the Chief Ombudsman may give Auckland Council leaders a kick up the backside to play nice. The Ombudsman will formally investigate 2 complaints from Auckland councillors over the release of reports into the feasibility of a downtown stadium. 9 councillors have signed a letter expressing dissatisfaction with the Mayor, Phil Goff, after he imposed restrictions on their access to the ratepayer-funded report. The director of Massey University's Public Management Group, Andy Asquith, says the feud has the potential to cause the council to become dysfunctional.
The underlying agenda here would be to give them both a kick up the backside and say, look, you need to sit down and put your toys away and play nicely.
Andy Asquith says the Mayor needs the backing of councillors to get anything done. Local iwi are praising Wellington City Council's Te Reo Māori policy, which will help make the capital a bilingual city. Councillors have voted unanimously in favour of the policy, committing to a promise to increase bilingual signage and support businesses to embrace te reo. More than 500 public submissions were received and 94% of them supported the move. Taku Parai, chair of local iwi Ngāti Toa, says today is a milestone for New Zealanders.
I think for us and for our whanaunga here, it's an earmark day. It's a day where we can celebrate as being Marty, New Zealanders, whoever, those that embrace te reo. And today the Council has led by example.
Ngāti toa Chair Taku Parai. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the All Blacks coach Steve Hansen says producing another strong performance after a big win is one of the biggest challenges in sport, and that's exactly what he's asking an unchanged team to do in Saturday's second test against France in Wellington. The All Blacks won 52-11 in the first match in Auckland last week, wearing down France's resistance before exploiting a dubious yellow card on their way to a comprehensive victory. While the All Blacks ran away with the game in the final 20 minutes, Hansen's well aware it took time for his team to get into second gear, and he's expecting them to play better from the first whistle.
The hardest thing to do in sport is back up a big scoreline with another big performance, and we've tried to work hard on our mental side of our game this week and get ourselves in the right space to be able to go out and play with real high energy and high intent. The French are a proud nation. They're going to come out and try and rectify some of the problems they had in that last 30 minutes, and we're going to need to be right up for it.
Steve Hansen. New Zealand's sole NBA basketballer Steve Adams has again turned his back on the Tall Blacks. Adams made himself unavailable for the side's upcoming World Cup qualifiers against Hong Kong and Rotorua and China in Auckland, despite not having any obvious commitment clashes, raising the question if he'll ever play for New Zealand. And the White Ferns teenager Amelia Kerr is still coming to grips with her achievement after posting the highest ever score in a women's one-day international cricket, making 232 not out in New Zealand's win over Ireland in this morning's final ODI in Dublin. That's the news.
The elephant in the room.
Well, I think we've found what the elephant is, and it's Shane Jones.
Sharing a room.
It's, we're trying to do the best we can with the budget available. We had to make some concessions, and that's one of them.
And not allowed in the room.
Top down, non-inclusive, secretive, furtive indeed. It doesn't create a good atmosphere.
Room for all views. Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, outrage that dated train station ramps are a barrier to wheelchair users trying to get to work. And after 10, author Gerard Conley on surviving gay conversion therapy as a teen and having his story told on a screen in a movie starring Nicole Kidman and Russell Crowe. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northern and western areas from Northland down to Wellington, including the central high country. Cloudy periods today with a few light showers in the west. Occasional rain or showers developing later tomorrow. For Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine but a few showers near the western ranges. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine but areas of low cloud or fog about the Canterbury coast and plains, brief showers tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, the odd shower today, occasional rain developing tomorrow. Fiordland, rain developing overnight. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today but areas of low cloud or fog, scattered rain tomorrow morning, then retreating to coastal Southland and Stewart Island in the afternoon. The Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. We'll see you again 5:30. Starting with Fonterra, the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has swung in behind his MP Shane Jones, joining him in savaging Fonterra and its chair. Mr Jones, who's the Regional Development Minister, has attacked the dairy giant, saying it needs to be restructured and its chair should get the next cab out of town. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is trying to distance the government from those comments, which of course come shortly before Mr Peters is due to take over as Prime Minister. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Oh, hello! How are you?
Jacinda Ardern doing the rounds at Field Days in Hamilton, one of the biggest events of the agriculture year, on what's expected to be her last official outing before the birth of her child. She arrives a day after Shane Jones and his searing broadside against Fonterra, something clearly on farmers' minds.
Being critical doesn't help. What's he had to offer?
He should be reprimanded.
He seems to have just shut his mouth up.
No, I think he should get them to himself.
But there'll be no discipline for Mr Jones. Ms Ardern says he made clear he was expressing his own opinion and not government policy.
Ministers share personal opinions all of the time, but what I'm making clear here is what he said is not government policy, and as I say, end of story, a personal opinion.
But even as she was distancing the government from the comments, back at Parliament, Shane Jones was doubling down.
This is not a government that's going to pander to the corporate culture that Fonterra at its highest level shows. We want accountability from New Zealand's largest company.
And his leader, Winston Peters, also Deputy Prime Minister, backs him to the hilt.
And I think that a massive, hundreds of million dollar loss needs an explanation. It needs a response in the market. There needs to be some accountability. Heads should roll.
Whose heads should roll? Like his New Zealand First colleague, Mr Peters has his sights on Fonterra's chair, John Wilson. The dairy giant reported a near $350 million loss earlier this year. That included a one-off settlement with Danone and a write-down of the value of its being made investment in China.
I cannot believe that with that massive loss in any respectable first world market, that someone could still be in their job.
Remember, Mr Peters is due to become acting Prime Minister when Jacinda Ardern goes into Labour any day now. National's Paul Goldsmith says New Zealand First is in open defiance of the Prime Minister.
She can't control Shane Jones or the New Zealand First ministers.
And he says it's nonsense to suggest Mr Jones is free to express his personal opinion.
It's weasel words. He is a Minister of Economic Development talking about New Zealand businesses. So he's not entitled actually to a personal opinion. He's the Minister.
The Minister who is in charge of agriculture is Damien O'Connor. He says a review into the whole dairy sector is currently underway, which will take Fonterra into account.
It's another really big and great company that we have in New Zealand. I'm not saying it's the best performing, I'm saying it should be and it needs to be, and we will tweak through the DERA review some of the requirements around Fonterra.
And what does Fonterra and its chair John Wilson think of all of this? They declined RNZ's request for an interview. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
Thanks, Craig, and do stay with us because we'll be sticking with that story. We have tracked down the chairman of the Fonterra Shareholders Council. His name's Duncan Cool, and we will talk to him after 6 o'clock tonight. So more on Fonterra, those comments are coming up. Now to Ireland, and a Kiwi who's done exceptionally well. A high school student from the Wellington suburb of Taupo has been the talk of the cricketing world today. She's still just 17, but Amelia Kerr racked up the highest score in a women's one-day international when she made 232 not out as New Zealand beat Ireland by a whopping 305 runs in Dublin to sweep the 3-match series. Kerr hit a 6 off the last ball to break the 21-year-old record. That's older than what she is. And also became the youngest player to hit a double century in a one-day international. Clay Wilson has more on the White Ferns' teenage star.
200 of 134 balls.
Amelia Kerr didn't even know she'd broken records, so it's unlikely she had picked up on the uncanny connection between her history-making score and the suburb where she has grown up perfecting her craft. 232 is also the dialling code for Tawa, and Kerr's principal Murray Lucas says the symmetry has not been lost on them.
We've always been 232, and there's a youth group at a local church that's got 232 on it, so the number probably couldn't be more fitting for someone that's grown up and lived in Tawa all her life.
Kerr hit 2 4s and a 6 from the final 3 balls of the New Zealand innings to break a 21-year-old record held by Australian Belinda Clark, one of the greats of the women's game and a player who captained her country to 2 World Cup crowns. It wasn't until after her astonishing innings, though, that Kerr came to learn the calibre of the player she had overtaken in the history books.
I wasn't born till 2000, but I didn't actually know who Belinda Clark was until I came off the field and the team told me, so it's very special and I'm very humbled and it's pretty surreal. It hasn't really sunk in yet.
Kerr had only just turned 16 when she burst onto the international scene as a spin bowler. But for White Ferns coach Hayley Tiffin, herself a former captain of the side, it was never going to be long before the tyro of the team proved her skills as a dual threat.
I've always known that Amelia has huge potential with the bat, and I genuinely think she'll be a top-class all-rounder for the team, and no doubt about it, she'll be batting in the top order for the future of the White Ferns. So that's what we saw first and foremost, the point of difference with the spin bowling, but the fact that she's actually gone out and worked really hard on her batting. Huge talented player, and at 17 she's got the world ahead of her.
Backing up that very statement, Kerr came out after her record-breaking innings and returned the superb figures of 5 wickets for just 17 runs. Proving her feet are very firmly on the ground, the uber-talented teen says she can't claim all the credit for her simply stunning all-round display.
I actually didn't think Susie was going to bowl me today. I thought she was just going to let me have a rest. I was fielding in slips, so I didn't need to do too much running. But yeah, got to have a bowl, which was nice, and the wicket was turning. I guess it's just one of those days, and I had a bit of luck along the way as well.
That humble nature and her success, Taupo College Principal Murray Lucas says, is a product of growing up in a place where community and family play a leading role. The daughter of former Wellington representative Robbie, Kerr's grandfather is a former principal at the school, her grandmother the former head of music, and her aunt and uncle both current teachers. Just 3 days ago, former Taupo College pupil Sophie Devine hit the fastest century in the history of women's one-day internationals. Lucas says a text school prefect Kerr sent him when the team arrived in the UK epitomises what makes her such a remarkable young woman.
She said, arrived in England yesterday and off to Ireland tomorrow. Hope you enjoy your long weekend and get a little bit of a break. And that's just typical of her. All my teachers have been amazing and have made it very easy for me to balance my schoolwork and cricket without having any stress. So that's the other thing that I would love to bring out, that here's someone on the top of the world, but she's still is disciplined and determined with her studies.
Her participation alongside the world's best players in the English T20 League means Kerr won't be back at school for a while. When she does eventually return, Lucas says there will only be one person who won't revel in her record-breaking feats.
She won't be back till middle of term 3, but certainly we'll be recognising her. But the person that would most dislike that will be Amelia herself.
Moti hotaka o te hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
Isn't that remarkable? And she's a bowler, so she's an all-rounder now. We've gone to Martin Guptill for comment on this story. Tune in and stay tuned for After 6. We'll talk to him because he sits just above her now on the all-time highest scores in one-day internationals. Rohit Sharma of the Indian is on top. So Amelia Kerr, third in the world, highest scores in one-day cricket. We'll have more from Martin Guptill after 6 o'clock. The Chief Ombudsman has launched a formal investigation into how the Auckland Council handled the release of a $900,000 report into the feasibility of a downtown stadium. The announcement comes as a number of councillors give their backing to Mayor Phil Goff, who's faced criticism over his leadership style. Our reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boshier, says his investigation follows 2 complaints from councillors, Kathy Casey and Efeso Collins. Mr Boshier says the complaints relate to the Auckland Council's decision to impose conditions on the release of the stadium reports to councillors. Those conditions meant they were given redacted versions of the report, and if they wanted to read an unredacted copy, they had to go to the Mayor's office and read it there. The Ombudsman's announcement comes after 9 councillors signed a letter to the Mayor Phil Goff yesterday, outlining concerns about his leadership and a lack of transparency within the council, particularly in relation to the stadium report. One of the 9 councillors who signed the letter, Mike Lee, told Morning Report that while they have to get on and work together, he's not happy with Mr Goff's leadership style.
Top-down, non-inclusive, secretive, furtive indeed. It doesn't create a good atmosphere or working relationship when the leader of the council behaves in that way.
RNZ has made repeated attempts to speak to other councillors who signed the letter, but no one else has been willing to comment. Richard Hills is a councillor for the North Shore. He says he didn't know about the letter until he read about it in the media.
It seemed a bit bizarre because it felt like we were in a good place with the 10-year budget and other things sort of going through unanimously, and the Mayor kind of working with all of us to get our priorities basically in that plan. So it was a bit of a shock to me.
Richard Hill says he has a good working relationship with the Mayor.
So I can't speak for others, but I can speak for myself that I go to his office whenever I want. If I have an issue, a problem, a question, if his door's open, I go in. If I don't, I book a time with him.
Another councillor, Alf Filipaina, says he didn't know about the letter, but even if he did, he wouldn't have signed it. He doesn't think it will cause divisions within the council.
That's their right to sign it, so I don't sort of look at them and say, look, you guys are crazy or anything else like that. So I don't think there will be any division.
Alf Filipaina says he too has a good working relationship with Phil Goff. But Andy Asquith, a local government expert from Massey University, warns the Mayor needs the backing of councillors to get anything done. He says the fallout from the letter could lead to dysfunction within the council, with issues falling to the wayside.
We have the potential, if things aren't sorted out fairly quickly, that basically we almost have stalemate in council. And we spend time between now and the next local body elections with council infighting.
Meanwhile, the Ombudsman says the first stage of his investigation has started, and he's written to the Chief Executive of Auckland Council and notified the complainants. He says he can't comment further, but he does want to complete his investigation as soon as possible, given the high public interest in the case. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Securing Christchurch's water system and ultimately stopping chlorination could cost as much as $40 million. The Christchurch City Council started chlorinating Christchurch's water in March. This was after concerns were raised in light of the Havelock North water contamination about the safety of its own water supply. The Christchurch Mayor says that by hell or high water, she'll get the chlorine removed, but new figures show it will be a costly process. Rachel Graham with more.
The council dropped a last-minute agenda item into today's meeting by adding an update on how it is progressing on securing the water system and thereby allowing for chlorination to be removed. The council's Program Manager of Water Supply, a role created specifically to fix the water issue, Helen Beaumont, said the council wanted to rely more heavily on above-ground pump stations, which are easier to make secure, but that would take longer than 12 months. Ms Beaumont says other options are also being considered, including using ultraviolet radiation and ozone treatment, and isolating the potentially risky below-ground wellheads. Upgrading the wellheads and improving the security of the water supply could now cost up to $40 million. The council has already approved $21 million to convert 81 wellheads and drill one new well. But Ms Beaumont says work is needed on another 19 wells that go into a shallow aquifer.
We're going to do some further work on that shallow aquifer to determine whether or not it's a secure aquifer. So we're doing some analysis of the age of the water, which will help us in that. And then we'll decide what work will be done on those 19 wells. If we replaced all of those 19 wells, that would add approximately $19 million to the program. If the water is secure and we simply raise the wellheads, then that would be a lot less. It would be around $5 million.
Former Christchurch Mayor Gary Moore says he's worried that this expensive process is another example of getting caught up in hysteria, much like the fear that drove Housing New Zealand to evict tenants over tiny traces of methamphetamine. Mr Moore says there is a conflict of interest in the role of the council's head of Three Waters and Waste, John Mackey, who is also a board member with lobby group Water New Zealand, which has been pushing for chlorination and privatisation of water.
I'm wondering if we've got the same thing with water in New Zealand, where a seemingly innocuous outfit called Water NZ, which you would assume was just a scientific organisation, isn't at all. It's a lobbying organisation, and they have an agenda that I actually find quite offensive.
The Board of Water New Zealand made a submission for chlorination of water to the inquiry into the Havelock North water contamination, as did Mr Mackey in a personal capacity. The Chief Executive of Water New Zealand, John Fallett, says the board's view was based on wide consultation within the sector, and there is no conflict in Mr Mackey representing that view.
Mr Mackey was elected from a membership organisation based on his technical and professional skills. You know, he's got a good reputation around the sector, and the position that he's adopting at Christchurch is entirely consistent with the views that he's been representing when Water New Zealand actually adopted its policy of recommending to councils that water be chlorinated or treated.
Mr Mackey wouldn't comment, but the Chief Executive of the Christchurch City Council, Carleen Edwards, said in a written response the advice to temporarily chlorinate the water came from the Canterbury Medical Officer of Health after the drinking water assessor advised that the groundwater source was no longer considered provisionally secure. This was in response to a new, stricter interpretation of the standards for groundwater security being used by the independent engineer who assessed the wellheads. She says Water New Zealand has many members, including employees of most, if not all, councils and council-controlled water companies, and the lobby group was not involved in the decision to chlorinate. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
A property management company which charged some Wellington students a $1,400 letting fee, their second in 4 months, to change a couple of names on the tenancy agreement, says it was a mistake. However, tenant advocates say extra fees like this are not uncommon, and it shows the sector needs tougher regulation. Ruth Hill reports.
Finn Carroll and his flatmates signed the lease on their inner-city Wellington pad in February and paid the property manager Oxygen a letting fee on top of their bond and rent in advance, about $7,000 in total. But when two flatmates moved out recently, Oxygen charged them another letting fee.
To add on two new flatmates, we were hit with this massive fee of $1,437.50. Yeah, it was just crazy. We didn't really know what to do, whether or not that was legal or not to start off with.
But since their story hit the media yesterday, Finn has today received an email from Oxygen apologising for what they called an outdated policy and saying it would be amended to a much more reasonable $250 fee. In his case, it's being waived as a gesture of goodwill. Finn is relieved, but suspects others may have been ripped off.
It makes you kind of wonder, doesn't it? As there have been lots of people that haven't chosen this route that we have of going to the media and talking to lots of different people that have just kind of bent over and paid it. It doesn't seem like a very fair practice. So I'm glad that that's been changed at Oxygen at least, but hopefully lots of other property managers will follow.
Oxygen's General Manager, Christian Casbolt, has told RNZ that charging another letting fee was clearly excessive.
So it was simply a mistake which hadn't been picked up, which now has been picked up and will be amended. So yeah, a learning curve there to keep an eye on processes and procedures.
Mr Casbolt can't say whether other tenants have been wrongly charged for updating the names on their tenancy agreements, but he's asked his team to look at it. The manual is being updated, and he's told staff they have discretion in such cases to ensure tenants are being treated equitably.
We're not here to gouge people. We work with both tenants and owners in an industry which has a reasonable amount of tension, has a lot of focus at the moment for various reasons. So the situation that happened yesterday, it's unfortunate that it couldn't be dealt with in-house because it would have been, quite simply.
The government is planning to ban property managers from charging tenants a letting fee or any other fee in relation to a tenancy. However, a tenants advocacy group warns the new law will have to be rigorously enforced, or fees and other admin charges will sneak back under different guises. Kate Day from Renters United says the solution is to licence property managers so the market can be properly regulated.
We see many renters struggling to have even their current legal rights enforced because it relies on the tenant having the confidence to take their landlord or property manager to the tribunal. And that's a really arduous process. But even then, there's a lot of elements of property managers' conduct which the tenancy tribunal isn't really set up to address.
Kate Day says these include the way some property managers behave in renters' homes and the level of transparency around fees. She says landlords should pay the cost of letting a property because it's a cost of doing business. The Social Services Select Committee is considering submissions on the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. It's due to report back to Parliament by October the 5th. For Checkpoint, Ruth Hill.
The latest from police, there was a serious crash reported just after 4 p.m. this afternoon in Napier. It involved a pedestrian and a car. Police have just given us an update saying that a male pedestrian has died following that collision in Napier. It was on Marty Road shortly before 4 p.m. That's in Napier. The serious crash unit is investigating, and we will bring you any updates that we do get from the police or our reporters on that incident in Napier. To something lighter now, a raccoon that spent 2 days climbing to the top of a 25-storey skyscraper has been captured. Mustn't have been very satisfying. But not before he became a social media star on the web, where it won the hearts of followers around the globe. Lisa Bernhard from Reuters has more.
Its gravity-defying grip and intense will captured hearts around the globe. And on Wednesday, the perilous 2-day journey of a Minnesota raccoon ended safely. The critter successfully reaching the summit of a 25-story St. Paul skyscraper, where it was captured. The UBS building it scaled, tweeting that after a delicious meal of soft cat food, it will be picked up by wildlife management, adding, "Goodbye, friend." The raccoon, a social media sensation as building tenants and news outlets tracked its progress, catching it up close as it paused on a 23rd floor window ledge for a little R&R. One user tweeting, "If the raccoon dies, we riot." How it found itself on the side of a high-rise is unclear. Reports saying it will be released somewhere safe. No word on a book deal or talk show appearances.
Coming up on Checkpoints, we go inside Waikato's Waikeria prison and ask if the government has done a U-turn on double bunking and public-private partnerships. The planned re-entry to the Pike River mine has been narrowed to 3 options, and we look ahead to the FIFA World Cup, which kicks off tomorrow, and the All Blacks' second test against France in Wellington this weekend. Don't forget, we do love your feedback. We love getting it in here, whether it's by text or by mobile, by email or Twitter, whichever way you follow us. We're on Facebook as well, of course. So get in touch. First, of course, Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The National Party is accusing the Prime Minister of using weasel words over New Zealand First MP's attacks on Fonterra. Winston Peters and Shane Jones have strongly criticised the dairy company and its chair. Jacinda Ardern says they are personal opinions and do not reflect government policy. Paul Goldsmith will not comment on Fonterra's management. There are now 3 possible options for the planned re-entry to the Pike River mine drift. They're via the existing entrance, building a second small tunnel or a 60 centimetres borehole. The Recovery Agency Chief Executive Dave Gawn is confident re-entry can begin later this year and within budget. 3 people remain in hospital with serious injuries after a commercial helicopter crashed near Waiuru this morning. Investigators are on their way to the remote site in the Kaweka Ranges. The Police Minister insists the rollout of 1,800 more officers won't lead to more people being put in prison. Labour has pledged to boost the number of sworn officers despite advice from Justice and Corrections, which have both told Stuart Nash an extra 900 prison beds would be needed. Mr Nash says he prefers to listen to the police, who say the new officers won't mean more pressure on prisons. A local government specialist says an inquiry by the Chief Ombudsman may give Auckland Council leaders a kick up the backside to make them play nice. The Ombudsman will formally investigate 2 complaints from Auckland councillors over the release of a report into the feasibility of a downtown stadium. In total, 9 councillors have signed a letter expressing dissatisfaction with the Mayor, Phil Goff, over restrictions on their access to the report. Andy Asquith of Massey University says the feud could make the council dysfunctional. The Kapiti Coast District Council has voted to give more funding to help Air Chathams in its bid to fly between Paraparaumu and Auckland. Air New Zealand stopped flying the route in April. The council has already said it will put $150,000 towards marketing the route, but it's not known how much more funding the airline will get. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Have you ever flown to Kapiti?
No.
I heard it's pretty expensive. Maybe this will change it a bit.
Let's hope so. I know it's very convenient for people in Wellington, if you live on the Kapiti Coast, not to have to drive all the way into Wellington.
That's right. Air Chathams. I used to cover Tonga and remember they kind of got booted out of there, so it's good to hear they're picking up a few other routes.
They're still going to Nelson and places like that, so they might be still there.
There you go. Good old Air Chathams. I think we can go to the all-knowledgeable Patrick O'Mara now with the business news. Are you there, Patrick?
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Very well. The US Federal Reserve's doing well. It's raised interest rates for the, second time this year. It's a 1/4 percentage point, but that's a 10-year high, isn't it, Patrick?
Yeah, indeed. It's been a long time coming. They've raised it to 2%. That now puts it ahead of New Zealand. We're on a rather modest 1.75%. Look, indicating that the US economy is in good shape and it does need interest rates to keep inflation, or higher interest rates to keep inflation in check. In fact, they're signalling another 2 this year and another 3 in 2019. So, very soon it's going to be up close to that 3% mark, whereas in New Zealand it's still likely to remain at 1.75 for the foreseeable future, well into next year. Now, the implications for New Zealand, and we're already starting to see it, it's really around the New Zealand dollar where most of the initial impact has been. That's started to fall as investors are putting their hot money back into the US where they can get a better return on their money. For the Reserve Bank, they're probably thinking now, well, with the dollar coming down, we should see a bit more imported, or the inflation from imports should start to go up. That may affect the timing of the interest rate rates here. We'll wait and see. And of course, for the banks here in New Zealand, it just may make the cost of funding from overseas just a little bit higher. and that means you and I, Alex, will probably start to see ask to pay a little bit more in our mortgage rates.
There you go. Just going to the US again, I mean, Donald Trump seems to suck all the oxygen out of every other story there, but the US economy obviously doing well. What's mainly driving that growth?
Look, it's been slow coming, and it certainly happened well before Donald Trump was in power, as much as he would like to claim credit for most things that happen. The US households have got a lot of debt down. They've cleared out a lot of bad debt out of the banks. Businesses are starting to invest, and I guess this is where Mr. Trump can actually take some credit through his tax cuts. That seems to have inspired a lot of confidence. The unemployment rate, of course, Alex, is at 3.8%. That's the best it's been since 2000, and it's expected to go lower. Now, wage rates are going up, perhaps not as strongly as what people would like, but it is going up, and they do expect core inflation to get towards that 2% mid-target by this year. So yeah, it's a strong economy. Now, the other side of that is it's not so good necessarily. There's higher interest rates overseas, particularly in emerging economies, particularly if they have got US dollar-denominated debt. That's now going up. They're going to have to pay more. So this is the flip side of that.
But that great job rate, obviously not quite the same here, and jobs are set to go at Spark as part of plans to cut costs. What's happening there?
Indeed. We've got about 1,900 workers. It's about 40% of their workforce. They're currently considering new employment contracts as Spark looks to reorganise its back office. Now, these are jobs such as IT, product development, and I've forgotten what the other one is. What did I say it was?
Check your notes.
Yeah, I will. I check my notes. You can never find them when you need. Oh, of course, marketing. How could I forget marketing? Sales and marketing. Now, Spark had already flagged this very early on. It's part of this quantum transformation project that they're underway. They're looking to trim costs, particularly out of their old part of the business. This is the landline side of it. The old it's the rather than the new parts, which is like the online and of course their mobile divisions. Now, what they're saying is that they're going to reorganise the way they do business away from towards things such as multidisciplinary teams. That means they need new job descriptions. What it does mean, though, there will be job cuts, up between 100 and 200 job cuts altogether. Now, people have got a week to consider these new contracts. Now, you and I may think that's actually not a lot of time to consider those contracts. But the company says we've been in discussions with workers since December. They had a formal consultation process which has been going now for a couple of weeks, and most staff, they say, are generally happy with the direction the company's going in. And in the meantime, the markets, how are they looking, Patrick? Well, the NZ Top 50, it rose a whole 1 point to push into new record high territory. It's at 8,978. New Zealand dollar, 70.3 US, 93 Australian and 52.5 British pence, Alex. Thanks so much, Patrick O'Mara, our economics correspondent and business reporter this evening in our Wellington studio. Just returning now to our story about the Chief Ombudsman launching a formal investigation into how Auckland Council handled the release of that downtown stadium report. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says he welcomes the investigation and that full unredacted copies of the report have been available to all councillors from the very beginning. In a statement, he says he wants to be transparent in providing information to councillors while also ensuring the confidentiality of commercially sensitive information that belongs to third parties. Mr Goff says his office and council staff will comply fully with any requests from the Ombudsman. That's just in, very fresh from Phil Goff's office. Moving to Waikeria Prison as the government prepares to build the new one. The police minister has been challenged on his firm belief that more police on the streets won't result in a larger prison muster. Under its coalition deal with New Zealand First, of course, Labor pledged to boost the number of sworn officers by 1,800 over 3 years. But National has questioned how the government will deal with the inevitable increase in people being locked away. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Police Minister Stuart Nash is juggling advice from various ministries. Justice and Corrections have advised him an extra 900 prison beds would be needed as a result of the new policy. Mr Nash, however, prefers to take the advice of police, which has said the rollout of new officers would not result in people ending up in jail. National's Chris Bishop asked him at a select committee how he deals with conflicting advice.
Your own paper says, this is your paper, you know, your name.
Can I have a look at that paper?
Your paper says that the official advice from Justice and Corrections is up to 900 new prison beds.
And
You're just ignoring that?
No, I don't ignore it at all.
Or do you not read it?
I absolutely do not ignore the advice at all.
Mr Bishop said as 700 of the 1,800 new officers will be focused on organised crime, that would of course mean more arrests. Mr Nash said if you take out the criminal leaders and the gangs supplying meth, that leads to a reduction in other related crimes like violent and sexual assaults.
If I actually thought that 1,800 more police would lead to more people in prison, then I'd be going to Mr Davis and Mr Little and saying, hey, you guys need to gear up because there's a wave coming your way.
I think they're gearing up anyway.
But on the balance of, on all the advice I have seen and all the evidence, I absolutely believe that more police in our communities will lead to less crime and less people in prison.
But he's not quite in step with his cabinet colleagues. Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis has allowed for more prisoners as a result of boosted police numbers, referring to it at yesterday's announcement about Waikeria Prison.
In 2021, the prison population is projected to have increased by a further 1,700. To be clear, these projections take into account the possible impact of increased police numbers.
Money to pay for the extra police was also discussed at the hearing. Mr Nash says the total cost of the extra police is about $515 million, but he's had to make do with the nearly $300 million allocated in the 2018 budget. Chris Bishop asked him whether that jeopardises the policy.
So you'll be going back next year for the balance between 298.8 and 515.
I'll be going back to get enough money to train police for the next financial year, and then I'll be going back in 2019 to get money to train for the following financial year.
So you're just going to have to keep going cap in hand every year.
That's how the budget process works.
Mr Nash could not make a rock-solid promise.
There is a budget negotiation process which will start in 3 or 4 months, and there'll be another budget in May 2019. But what I can assure you is that we will deliver, or we will strive to deliver, on our promise of delivering 1,800 more police.
Chris Bishop also asked why a specific target for police to respond to nearly all home burglaries has been dropped. Mr Nash says as Minister he has 2 targets for the police. The first, that police have 90% public trust and confidence levels, and that officers are well enough equipped to do their job. But he says the police themselves still have a large range of operational targets. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Meanwhile, after heavily criticising both double bunking and public-private partnerships while in opposition, the government is now going ahead with both at Waikato's Waikeria prison. In 2013, in her capacity as opposition corrections spokesperson, the Prime Minister spoke out against public-private partnerships, saying they were the first step in privatising day-to-day prison management. So what's changed? Zach Fleming went inside Waikeria to find out.
107 years of criminals have left Waikato's Waikeria prison unfit for use. And on one hand, Correction Minister Kelvin Davis's announcement of a small prison to replace it was to be expected.
American-styled mega prisons are crime-breeding factories. They swallow up young offenders and spit out hardened criminals, sometimes a fully patched gang member. They do not keep communities safe. We have chosen to build a smaller prison, because smaller prisons work.
But on the other hand, the decision represents 2 U-turns. Half of the cells will be double bunked, something Labour in opposition heavily criticised National for, though Mr Davis didn't actually know that when asked.
Oh, those decisions are yet to be really finalised. The company that's going to be building the prison and corrections have yet to work, will work out those details.
Do you know the proportion of how many units will be double bunked?
No, those are decisions that corrections and...
I think it's 50%.
Yes, it's likely to be 50%.
Corrections Chief Executive Ray Smith jumping in there to save a lost-for-words Kelvin Davis, something Mr Smith had to do on several occasions yesterday. The new Waikeria, at the moment just a mound of dirt, will be built under a public-private partnership, or PPP, something Mr Davis failed to mention in his press release or press conference yesterday. Possibly because, like double bunking, Labour heavily criticised PPPs in opposition. Speaking in her capacity as opposition corrections spokesperson in 2013, Jacinda Ardern said PPPs are the first step to privatising day-to-day prison management. But at field days today, the Prime Minister said she was only referring to managing prisons.
Oh, there's a big difference here. That was about a prison that was being managed privately. What we have here existing with Waikeria is simply a contract to build. With a new Waikeria build will not be managed privately, it will be managed by the Department of Corrections.
The 600-bed Waikeria replacement, which will include a 100-bed mental health unit, is a third of the size of what National wanted to build, a 2,000-bed mega prison, but it will cost almost the same, $750 million.
The costs are there regardless of the ultimate size of it. So the bed spaces are the least expensive. It's more the other things that go around to support the whole prison.
And given this admission 5 minutes earlier,
we have 10,600 people inside a network designed to house 9,254.
And that number's expected to increase by 1,700 in just 3 years. So why not build a mega prison, just in case?
We're trying to reduce the prison population by 30%, and what you do then is you take so much pressure off that there's no pressure to actually do what you know is right. Like I said in my speech, doing what's right isn't always easy, but it is always right.
But don't you have the power as Minister to apply that pressure to try and still bring those numbers down, but contingency plan will have enough beds just in case?
I think that's a bit of a defeatist attitude. We're trying, we're going to increase the prison capacity across the network capacity, as well as try and bring down the prison population.
But that capacity increase is coming almost entirely from temporary units. 976 rapid builds due by the end of next year. Kelvin Davis then putting all his eggs in one basket.
Reducing the prison population by 30% over 15 years.
With no backup plan if he can't. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
To Pike River now, the planned re-entry to the mine has been narrowed to 3 options. Mining specialists, Pike River Recovery Agency staff, as well as family members of those killed in the 2010 blast, are on the west coast for a second workshop aimed at coming up with a plan for manned re-entry of the mine drift. Tracy Neal's on the coast and filed this report.
There are now 3 options on the table for entering the Pike River mine, using the existing entry to the drift, building a second small tunnel or creating a large borehole about 60 centimetres wide. Dingy Pattinson, who's the Recovery Agency's Chief Operating Officer, says he's confident they'll get back in.
Any mining activity has dangers or risks involved, and so it's a matter of just identifying all those risks throughout the whole process and having your controls in place. So if there was any real danger that I thought was a danger, then that would be a showstopper. So at this stage, all the risks that have been identified, I feel confident we can manage those risks.
The government is spending up to $23 million on the re-entry project with the aim of recovering some of the bodies of the 29 men who were killed in the mine explosion and finding out more about how the disaster happened. Last month, a panel of technical experts met in Greymouth to begin a concept plan. Recovery Agency Chief Executive Dave Gawn says they've made bigger steps during this second workshop.
We still anticipate entering the mine before the end of the year, and we still think that that's certainly achievable. This workshop is only step number 2 and a number of other steps yet to take.
Among the steps, a detailed risk analysis of the preferred options. Anna Osborne, who lost her husband Milton, says she's feeling good about the progress that's being made.
We're really positive that this is going to go ahead. Listening to all the experts and having our experts on board as well gives the families real confidence in the project going forward. And it's nothing that couldn't have been done 7 years ago, to be honest.
Bernie Monk, another flag bearer for the families and who lost his son Michael in the explosion, says the battle for manned re-entry continues to be about more than their individual loss.
We've created something in New Zealand where people can, if they're prepared to roll their sleeves up and voice an opinion on something that is right, and in our case to bring people home that went to work and didn't come home, I think, I think we're on the right road to home to set an example for other people for the future of New Zealand.
Dave Gawn says the results of today's workshop will be reviewed by an independent team.
After that, and once Minister Little is comfortable with where we're at, then we will go on to the detailed planning process and the risk analysis.
That's likely to be late July or early August. In Greymouth for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
To rugby now, and the All Blacks and France named their teams today for this weekend's second test in Wellington, with the hosts picking an unchanged side from the 52-11 win in the opening test in Auckland. France, on the other hand, have pinned their hopes on club form after making 5 changes, bringing in several stars who were involved in the French top 14 club final, which happened earlier this month. There is some bad blood, though, stemming from the Eden Park clash at the weekend, in which an incident led to France wing Remy Grosso suffering a fractured face. Don't know whether you saw it. There is really a debate about whether Sam Cane and Ofa Tuongafasi could be held accountable for that damage. Anyway, the French will be motivated by vengeance, as Joe Porter reports.
Head clash. Big head clash. Straight into Tuongafasi. Sam Cane's involved as well. 3 for the price of 1.
That double tackle from Sam Cane and Ofa Tuongafasi left Remy Grosso with 2 facial fractures. The pair escaped punishment, much to the ire of French pundits who labelled the All Blacks dirty. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen bristled at the suggestion.
Someone gave me a good analogy this morning, actually. Sometimes when you drive your car and you're driving at the right speed limit and then a little kid runs around out in front of you, is it the kid's fault or your fault? And in our game, that things are fluid and they change, and you can't stop something that you've committed to and someone's angle changes.
And he was equally incensed by French scribes who called the All Blacks cheats.
We've been called cheats for 100 years, haven't we? If you keep winning, I suppose people have got to find reasons. Like Richie McCaw was the biggest cheat ever. Yeah, he didn't cheat, he just played to the letter of the law. And I know when Auckland were playing Canterbury, they were the biggest cheats. And then Canterbury got on top and they were the biggest cheats.
French flanker Kellyon Galtier was more diplomatic, but says he's hoping for a fairer refereeing performance this weekend. And it's not just the French who think the All Blacks get it good, with former English referee Rob Debney claiming there's a subconscious bias towards New Zealand when it comes to contentious decisions. The All Blacks assistant Ian Foster says that's codswallop.
Clearly, we don't think we get any favours from the referees at all. And I think if you look at penalty counts, yellow cards last year, weren't we one of the top yellow carded teams in the world last year?
Indeed they were, with the All Blacks alongside Argentina the most carded Tier 1 nation last year. However, with World Rugby making moves to lower the maximum height of a tackle from the shoulders to the nipple, fullback Geordie Barrett says the All Blacks have been taking extra steps to make sure they don't fall foul of the rules.
Anything that's above the shoulders is you're getting into dangerous territory, and working pretty hard on our defensive technique around the tackle and getting that right around the waist or under the ball. That's what we're focusing on. There's going to be some time on the sideline if we do get into that head area, so we're working on it.
One working particularly hard on technique is Sam Cane, who could be in for some extra attention from the French forwards after his role in the Grosso tackle. He says if the French are distracted by revenge, it could play into the All Blacks' hands.
We have to say if teams are doing things like off the ball niggle and things like that, it often means you're slightly diverted from your tasks.
And if the French allow that to happen, it could be another black night for Les Bleus in Wellington. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
There's been extraordinary scenes in the British House of Commons over the past few hours as the continuing shambles over Brexit threatens to spiral out of control. Prime Minister Theresa May is on the ropes again, this time with some of her own MPs claiming she could fail to deliver on promises they were given over Brexit. And at question time, the entire Scottish National Party walked out after a barney with the Speaker, claiming Scotland was being ignored by the Tories. The Brexit vote has already felled one Prime Minister, and now an increasing sense of chaos has Mrs May front and centre. The BBC's political editor Laura Koonsberg reports.
The Prime Minister made it to this morning, avoiding defeat last night,
because some of the wannabe rebels believe she made them a promise behind closed doors, that she'd change her plans for what happens if the final Brexit deal explodes.
I trust the Prime Minister and I know she will be true to her word. It would be a terrible betrayal if she weren't, and she is a woman of her word, and she's just given an absolute undertaking at the dispatch box. Job done.
But in what feels like a game of she said, he said, not everyone's version of exactly what was promised is precisely the same.
It will in the end be determined by what actually is conceded, and it's too soon to tell. My fear, however, is that the damage, frankly, has already been done.
The Tories are hardly talking each other's language, let alone the rest of ours. But what's happening is that the Prime Minister is trying to please a faction of her party who want Parliament to have more control if the final Brexit deal goes sour. But she also has to keep on board dozens of others who think if that happened, the best thing might be simply to walk away. But you can hardly please all of the people all of the time, even on your own side.
The leader of the SNP in Westminster was cross too.
Given the disrespect that's shown.
That last night there were only minutes of debate about how Brexit affects Scotland, so used dusty rules of the Commons to provoke a row.
I order the right honourable gentleman to withdraw immediately from the House.
Predictably thrown out by the Speaker.
Very well.
Applauded adoringly by his own side.
We have had changes to the devolution settlement that were pushed through last night without Scottish MPs' voices being heard. That's a democratic outrage.
But Labour had its own drama tonight. 90 MPs went against Jeremy Corbyn's orders on yet another vote about keeping close ties to the EU. 5 of his front bench, including some of his shiny new MPs, quit their roles to do so. Brexit is complicated for all the parties, and that gives the government's foes many reasons to attack. The Prime Minister is not the only one struggling to contain every peck.
Laura Koonsberg there reporting from a pretty rowdy house in Westminster. Moving to the other side of Europe, it's game time in Russia. The 2018 FIFA World Cup kicks off in just a few hours. 32 teams will compete, with their matches being played in 11 different cities. The fans have arrived, the grounds are ready, but there's already drama. Spain has just sacked its coach, and the Russian hosts have to handle being the lowest ranked team in the competition. Amidst all of this, what role will Vladimir Putin play? The BBC sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
Whether you like it or not, Russia is about to play host to football's greatest showpiece. And wherever it's staged, there's still nothing quite like it in sport. Fans from around the world already enjoying the build-up here in Moscow. Politics is never far away from such occasions, and today President Putin himself made a surprise appearance at a FIFA meeting. Our country is ready to host the World Cup, he said, to provide all those who come to Russia the best time and the most positive experience.
Welcome to Russia.
Putin's ordered a crackdown on the kind of Russian hooliganism that marred Euro 2016. Sergei was one of those convicted after the violence and served 7 months in a French prison, but told me there'll be no repeat.
A lot of work was made by police with supporters, fans, hooligans to protect this World Championship. I suppose no. I suppose this will be a holiday of football.
Racism continues to mar the game here. Russian football authorities fined after France players suffered racial abuse during a friendly in March.
For Russia, this is a very big moment because relations with the West have soured immeasurably since they were awarded this tournament. They are now trying to carve out a niche for themselves on the world stage, and to have, basic levels of racism taking place will mean that their big moment is being tarnished.
Amid geopolitical and diplomatic tensions, many in the West see this as a vanity project for President Putin, and he's sure to play a prominent role here at the Luzhniki Stadium tomorrow when the tournament kicks off. But despite the fact that sport and politics have never felt quite so closely linked, on the pitch, Russia 2018 has the potential to be a footballing spectacle.
The drama's already begun. One of the favourites, Spain, remarkably sacking their coach today over his decision to join Real Madrid. And when the action does start, the first use at a World Cup of VAR, the video assistant referee, is sure to spark debate. And spare a thought for this man, the coach of Russia, managing a warm welcome despite his team being the worst ranked in the tournament.
Home team must be good because the people have interest in only for our team.
Lots of pressure on you?
Yes. Not pressure.
No?
It's not that normal job.
The world's best players will now compete for the sport's greatest prize. The countdown almost complete to a World Cup that could be as compelling as it is controversial.
Dan Rowan there in Moscow. Thanks for getting in touch. There's more coming up on Amelia Kerr, and we do have some of your feedback. Grayman's been in touch. Well done, Amelia Kerr, he says. Some individuals just have a gift, and with the opening up of women's sport, we're the witnesses, he says. There will be more in quick succession, trust me. This is what happens when we break through into a new paradigm. Well done. And Carol Dye's been in touch saying it would be good to also acknowledge Amelia's mother, Joanna Murray, who also played cricket for Wellington, not just her father, Robbie Kerr. It's important to acknowledge also that the grandfather, Bruce Murray, is the ex-principal of Taupo College. Thanks for getting in touch. More after the news.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has joined his MP Shane Jones in savaging Fonterra and its chairperson. Mr Jones, who's Regional Economic Development Minister, has attacked the company, saying it needs to be restructured and its chair should get the next cab out of town. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says Mr Jones' comments do not reflect government policy, but Mr Peters, who's also Deputy Prime Minister, backs Mr Jones and says heads should roll at Fonterra. The dairy giant announced a loss in March of about $350 million for the 6 months to September. Asked whether the chair should resign, Mr Peters says he can't understand how he's still in the job. The National Party won't comment on Fonterra's management, but says New Zealand First is in open defiance of the Prime Minister. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
The planned re-entry to the Pike River mine has been narrowed to 3 options. Mining specialists, Pike River Recovery Agency staff and relatives of those killed in the 2010 mine blast are on the west coast for a second workshop on planning a manned re-entry of the mine drift. Now under consideration are a re-entry via the existing entrance, a second small tunnel that would need to be built, or a large borehole about 600 millimetres wide. The agency's chief executive, Dave Gawn, says he's confident a re-entry can begin later in the year. The Police Minister is adamant having an extra 1,800 police on the streets will not lead to an increase in the prison muster. Under its coalition deal with New Zealand First, Labour pledged to boost the number of sworn officers over 3 years. That's despite advice Stuart Nash has had from Justice and Corrections, which both say an extra 900 beds would be needed. Mr Nash says he prefers to take advice of police, which has said the roll out of new officers will add no extra pressure on prisons. He told a parliamentary committee he would have warned his colleagues, the Corrections Minister and Justice Minister.
If I actually thought that 1,800 more police would lead to more people in prison, then I'd be going to Mr Davis and Mr Little and saying, hey, you guys need to gear up because there's a wave coming your way.
The Police Minister, Stuart Nash. The Chief Ombudsman has launched a formal investigation into complaints made by Auckland councillors about the release of reports into the feasibility of a downtown stadium. The Mayor, Phil Goff, says his office and council staff will cooperate fully. Sarah Robson has more.
2 councillors complained to the Ombudsman over the council's decision to impose conditions on the release of the $900,000 report. The Chief Ombudsman, Peter Boshier, says he can't comment further, but is working to complete his investigation as soon as possible, given the high public interest in this case. Phil Goff says he is keen to be transparent in providing information to councillors, but he says he also has the obligation to ensure the confidentiality of commercially sensitive information belonging to third parties. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
A bankrupt Auckland builder will spend the next 3 years in prison after he gambled away more than $1 million meant for his creditors. Lee Dong-Shui pleaded guilty to 10 charges under the Insolvency Act after he continued to unlawfully run his bankrupt business for 5 years from 2010. He put the $1.5 million he earned into slot machines at Sky City Casino rather than pay back his creditors. Xie then tried to flee to China but was arrested at Auckland Airport. He's now been sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, which brought the charges, says the sentence sends a strong message that people who try to game the system will be met with serious consequences. The US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is confident North Korea understands there'll be an in-depth verification of the dismantling of his nuclear program before any deal on sanctions can be done. Mr. Pompeo was talking to journalists the day after a joint statement signed by Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore on North Korean disarmament and bilateral relations. Mr. Pompeo has also rejected criticism that the joint statement failed to include the terms verifiable and irreversible, two conditions he and other US officials have repeatedly said are necessary for the deal. He says the process is underway and North Korea understands what is required.
If Kim Jong-un denuclearizes, there is a bright future for North Korea and its people. Kim Jong-un indicated in Singapore that he shared that vision. We are eager to see him take the next steps to achieve it, because the United States is ready for a new chapter in our history.
Mike Pompeo. It's 6:05. Sport. New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andy Martin says Andreas Heref will keep his roles as both technical director and football ferns coach. Speaking from Russia, Martin says both Heref's roles are safe and he won't be asking for the Austrian's resignation from either job. Heref has been under pressure since his comments on Sunday following the football ferns' loss to Japan in Wellington, when he said New Zealand would never have the quality to compete with Japan. Martin says he was disappointed with the comments and says they're not in line with the never say die attitude New Zealand football wants. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen has compared head injuries in rugby union to a car crash, saying sometimes they're nobody's fault. Questions about the skull fracture suffered by French winger Remy Grosso in the first test in Auckland riled Hansen again today as the teams build towards Saturday's second test in Wellington. He maintains forwards Sam Cane and Ofa Tuangafasi were unlucky to connect with the head in a double tackle which earned nothing more than a penalty.
Sometimes when you drive your car and you're driving at the right speed limit and then a little kid runs out in front of you, is it the kid's fault or your fault? And in our game, that things are fluid and they change and you can't stop something that you've committed to and someone's angle changes.
Steve Hansen. New Zealand golfers Ryan Fox and Tim Wilkinson begin their US Open campaigns tonight in New York, and the Football World Cup kicks off in Russia tonight with the hosts taking on Saudi Arabia in the opening match. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Our Changing World finds out how a slick of floating pumice led geologists to the largest underwater volcanic eruption so far recorded. The BBC asks if it's right to kill insects in the name of science. While our cultural ambassador, Raymond Songapalatelli, has news from South Auckland, everything from moving the speedway from Western Springs to Wiri to debate on Jonah Lomu's headstone.
And between 10 and 11 p.m, join me, Karen Hay, for Lately. We'll be focusing on the events of the day, both nationally and internationally, and talking to the newsmakers in an eclectic mix that covers everything from the arts to politics to live events. That's Lately with Karen Hay in the 10 p.m. hour, weeknights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northern and western areas from Northland down to Wellington, including the central high country. Cloudy periods today with a few light showers in the west. Occasional rain or showers developing later tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Mainly fine, but a few showers near the western ranges. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly fine, but areas of low cloud or fog about the Canterbury coast and plains. Brief showers tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, the odd shower today, occasional rain developing tomorrow. Fiordland, rain developing overnight. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, but areas of low cloud or fog. Scattered rain tomorrow morning, then retreating to coastal Southland and Stewart Island in the afternoon. The Chatham Islands, occasional showers. It's exactly 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina. Kia ora, everyone. You're listening to Checkpoint, normally with John Campbell. I'm Alex Perrottet, in for John, and we'll be back tomorrow as well. To Fonterra straight away. The chair of the Shareholders Council admits there is frustration over the dairy giant's volatile earnings and substance to a government minister's claims that the board is out of touch. Duncan Cool is responding to criticism from the Regional Development Minister Shane Jones, who's calling on Chairman John Wilson to step down, citing what he calls an absolute absence of accountability. Speaking on behalf of shareholders, Duncan Cool says New Zealand's largest company could do better.
We have 10,500 shareholders up and down the countries, all who operate their own independent businesses, who are in different stages of their life cycle, have different ownership models, have different sized farms, and so within that you're always going to have some diversity in terms of the thought and feeling towards the business they own. But I think there's some frustration out there, let's be honest. Whilst we're in a really strong milk price environment, our earnings haven't been that great of late, and a lot of volatility in the earnings, and it's just causing some frustration. But overall, I was at the field days yesterday and spent the day in the tent and talked to many farmers, and the mood was very positive.
And what the negative parts of this, those who are a bit upset about what's going on at the top, what specific complaints are you hearing?
Oh, I don't know about specific complaints. I didn't have any specific complaints yesterday, but I think that there's a frustration within some of our shareholders as to the reliability of earnings and in terms of return on investment into the shares that they own in their cooperative. But there's also some within the cooperative that just from time to time feel as though they are just missing that sort of sense of belonging to the business they own. So it's something that as a council we're very focused on and looking to ensure that as a cooperative owned by its farmers, we're constantly working on ensuring that we keep well connected with our owners. So it's not about communication per se, but making sure that we communicate in a way that resonates with those that are the audience.
And of course, the company has to be very careful about how it invests its money. There's the concerns about the investment in the Chinese cooperative being mate, that going sour. There are other concerns about the way the company is investing funds?
No, I think that's probably been the headline this year. But I think the other thing being is that what tends to happen is when our milk price increases, and we've got a lot of volatility in the global market, and when our milk price increases, that puts pressure on the dividend stream, and so there's some frustration from that from time to time. But on the whole, most farmers look at the total shareholder return, and so they look at the milk price and dividend. They add those two together and say, well, am I doing okay? And right now, most of them would suggest to me that we're doing okay.
Now, have you talked to John Wilson? This is the chair of Fonterra. There's the claim, of course, that he's disconnected from farmers. Have you had any words with him?
No, well, obviously this claim that you're referring to was something that was in the news yesterday, and I was at the field days yesterday, as was the chairman. But no, I haven't had any discussions with him on that. I guess people are entitled to their views. We live in a democracy, and it's just the way it is from time to time.
It certainly was unsettling for some when Shane Jones waded into Air New Zealand and its operations. Do you feel the same way when the words are aimed at Fonterra in such a way that the chair should take the next cab out of town?
Oh, look, that doesn't concern myself a great deal. I take greater notice of the concerns that are aired by my shareholders who I represent. That said, Fonterra, being New Zealand's largest company owned by its farmers, represents a good portion of our GDP. It needs to ensure that it has strong relationships, and we have a strong working relationship with our government. We export 95% of what we produce, so that would be the thing that would concern me. But outside that, I guess people are entitled to views.
There's a broad range of views. You're saying some positive, some negative. It seems that, reading about one of them who commented that, well, it's no one in particular that they have concerns with on the board or in the company, but there's a general mood that it could do better. How do you think the board could be more connected to farmers?
I think farmers, being business people, would suggest that a great way to connect would be ensuring that their cooperative performs, but just needs to ensure that communication is open, transparent, and in a timely fashion. So, and on the whole, I think it's doing okay. But I think we all need to challenge ourselves as to what we can do better, and that's what they should be doing.
Duncan Cool there on behalf of the shareholders of Fonterra, giving a mixed report card saying they could do better, they should communicate better, did want to distance himself or stay at arm's length from Shane Jones' comments that the chair should take the next cab out of town. We will have more, hopefully, from the company in the next day or so. Now, teenage cricket prodigy Amelia Kerr was forced to stand on the street outside a Dublin bar while her white fern teammates celebrated her historic 232 not out against Ireland. The score is the highest women's one-day international score and the highest one-day international knock ever, behind India's Rohit Sharma and our own Martin Guptill, who hit 237 not out against the West Indies in the 2015 World Cup quarter-final. After batting, the 17-year-old, who still attends Wellington's Taupo College, took 5 wickets for 17 runs. That was a career best after a 2-minute sleep on the physio table. Martin Guptill told me this afternoon Amelia Kerr's combined performance with bat and ball might go down as the best in cricket history.
It's a pretty phenomenal effort, but I think what makes it even better is she took 5 wickets and then checked innings as well. So it was pretty, I reckon, from what I've seen, probably the best performance in an ODI in the history of the game. So she did an amazing day.
It's interesting you point out 5 for 17 were her figures. She's known primarily as a leg spin bowler. I spoke to a coach earlier, or a previous coach earlier today, and pointed that out. But I guess you're going to have to call her an all-rounder from now on.
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard not to be honest, when you score 230 in one day. But no, she must have been working extremely hard in the off-season, and the White Ferns have played some pretty exciting cricket over the last 3 games in Ireland there. So it's all looking up for their tour of England, the next couple of months.
I mean, she has spoken to RNZ programs earlier this morning and to our sports reporters. I wanted to ask you, though, I mean, when you're so young and you get that kind of score or that kind of achievement, and we heard the funny story of her waiting outside the pub. She's only 17, while all the rest of her teammates celebrate it. I mean, what's it like to have such a huge achievement at such a young age?
Oh, that'll be absolutely awesome for her. I think, 17 years old, to have a world record like that, is a pretty amazing feat. She should be extremely proud of herself for what she's done, and she's going to have that for the rest of her life, and that's pretty awesome for her.
Now, you're the second highest scorer in the world after Rohit Sharma. You got your score at the 2015 World Cup quarter-final. Now, I don't want to put any limits on you here, Marty, but I think that's probably in the, let's say, the second half of your career, a illustrious career. Here's a 17-year-old who's scored 232 not out at 17 years old. Has she propelled us into yet another era in cricket?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the game is forever evolving, and there's always new rules and new things coming in, and so there's no limits, I guess, as to what can be done in the game. So who knows? The next one she might get 250, but look, it's a pretty tough thing to actually back up a big score like that. I found that out in the semi-final of the World Cup, but look, I think she should, look back on what she did and be extremely proud and just be in the moment and just take it in a stride. It was a fantastic effort.
I don't know whether you caught some of the footage, the highlights that we've seen, some of her stroke play there on the field. I couldn't help but think, looking at the oval, that it was a little bit pedestrian. It looked a little bit like a warm-up oval. You've got the nets there in the background. Do you think something like this will help project women's cricket in terms of getting more recognition, more following around the world, hopefully kicking it into that business model whereby we might be able to see these amazing women play in front of bigger crowds at bigger venues?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I haven't actually played over there in Clontarf before, but the Black Caps played there last year, and they did say it was quite a small ground. But the power hitting that she showed, and I saw a few clips and things, that there's some seriously good power hitting, but also great batsmanship and hitting gaps and making sure that she didn't hit any fielders. So, in that sense, I think if they can keep, the White Ferns especially can keep putting up big scores like that and playing the exciting brand of cricket they are, then they are going to get those big crowds in and get them more exposure to play at the bigger grounds against bigger crowds.
You've been in the game for a long time. What's your word of advice to her, someone who's made it? She's hit the headlines at a young age. People go in and out of form in cricket and throughout their careers. What's your advice for her now as she faces the next hurdle?
Just keep enjoying cricket. I mean, there's so many ups and downs in the game that you just got to try and keep the love for the game and keep having fun. I think that's the biggest key. And then, if you can keep as level as that and just keep enjoying it, enjoying the ride, then, there's going to be more ups and downs. So I guess that's one key piece of advice.
Marty Guptill there talking to me a bit earlier on. He's the second highest run scorer in international one-day cricket, just ahead of Amelia Kerr, who's hit 232 in Dublin. Staying with sport, the New Zealand football chief executive Andy Martin has broken his silence over the controversy surrounding under-fire football Ferns coach Andreas Heraf. The Austrian has copped plenty of criticism from fans of the sport in this country after his team adopted an ultra-defensive approach in their 3-1 loss to Japan last Sunday, with some supporters calling for him to stand down with immediate effect. Martin spoke to media in the last hour via a conference call from Russia, where he's currently there for the Congress of the global governing body FIFA. Now, sports reporter Clay Wilson was on that conference call and joins me now in the studio. What was the tone of the call, Clay?
One of the more interesting conference calls I've been on, or calls in general, for a while. Media have been waiting to speak to Andy Martin for a number of days now. Of course, he's the head of the organisation. This has been a fairly substantial saga. So a good 8 or 9 reporters very intent to ask some serious questions. So it was an interesting mood, to say the least.
How did he handle the questions? I mean, was it just a brain explosion after the match? Maybe his frustration coming out, or was it something deeper there?
Yeah, I think probably Andy Martin's had some days now to digest this and come up with some responses. So, I mean, largely it was supportive of Andreas Heraf, the man in the gun here. But I think probably, Martin has made some apologies for things that went on, but largely he has backed Heraf and his future.
Right, because there's still calls for Andreas Heraf to resign immediately. I mean, what was the reaction to that by Andy Martin?
Yeah, he was asked point blank if he would be seeking Heraf's resignation, to which he answered no. Basically explaining that they still feel he's the most qualified man for the job. They still believe that he's the man to take this team forward. He did apologise, as I said, for some of the comments Heraf made around the team and their ability to compete. But what he did point to is the team haven't won a game at the World Cup the last 2 cycles or ever. So he said there was need for change, and sometimes change wasn't easy. They had to go through that, but he did sort of apologise for that. And Heraf also commented about the technical ability of the team. And Martin said perhaps they don't have that now, but they should still aspire to that. So I guess there was some things he took issue with what Heraf said, and he's certainly going to have a good sit down with him when he gets back. But as I said, largely supportive and I guess trying to back his man.
You mentioned that he had concerns on the technical play. Obviously, you want a lot of support from a coach, but we know that one of his other jobs is the technical director of New Zealand football. Did they have anything to say about his ongoing role there? Yeah,
well, fans and supporters and players of the sport in this country are concerned because he has this overarching role. Is that going to flow down, this negative style of play that we saw from the Ferns on Sunday? Is this going to flow down to the grassroots, to the young kids playing, to the youth development teams, our age group teams? Martin basically said that he didn't think that was the case. He thinks that this is simply a case of the Ferns being in this particular position and needing to play this way and, I guess, develop their game. He's confident that there is still a lot of people out there, despite all the criticism we've had from the fans, that support Heraf, coaches and players that support him and what he's doing. Runs contrary to a large part of what we've seen on social media and just out and about in the football community. But they believe they've got the support, and as I said, they're not planning on Heraf stepping down or asking him to step down in any way.
Okay, we'll follow that further. Clay Wilson, thanks so much for your time and for that update. Clay has been on a conference call in the last hour with Andy Martin, reporters, and of course the topic being that embattled football Ferns coach Andreas Heraf, so we will keep you up to date with that. To the Kapiti Coast now, where residents have presented a 22,000 signature petition to Parliament demanding a hospital for their region. They're fed up with being forced to drive an hour into Wellington in emergencies or pay for expensive local after-hours care. And they're hoping for a shake-up of the area's medical services. Mediana Johnson reports.
When Lynn Pedersen's husband suddenly fell ill in the middle of the night, she had to get him to hospital as quickly as possible. She tried ringing an ambulance, but there were none immediately available, so she had to drive him there herself.
So having to drive Conrad into Wellington Hospital by myself and, worried about him, thinking he'd had a stroke.
The experience was so awful, the Kapiti Coast pensioner decided to join a campaign for a new hospital. About a third of the 53,000 people living in the district are over 65 and have to drive to Porirua or Wellington if they're having a medical emergency. Lynn Pedersen says that's a barrier for both young and old.
I think we're a big community now, or a bigger community, and I hope, will attract more families to the area. And it's one of the biggest anti-Kapiti comments that I hear. No hospital.
The campaign organiser Sue Imavali says there needs to be more affordable after-hours services.
Because you don't have a heart attack from 8 to 5, you don't break a bone from 8 to 5, children don't get sick 8 to 5. And currently our after-hours service here in Kapiti, which is very good, is very expensive. And so people just can't afford it, so they don't go.
She says simple pre-surgery shouldn't require a trip into the city.
90-year-olds are having to catch a train into Wellington, then a bus to the hospital just to be checked. We don't have any hospital-provided transport here, and at all costs. The other thing is that a lot of families have to take a day off work to take a family member to an appointment in Wellington Hospital.
Kapiti Coast District Mayor Kay Gurunathan says his region desperately needs better medical services and needs them now.
This is all not acceptable. We accept the fact that the hospital petition is actually a movement to ensure that we get the services, not necessarily bricks and mortar.
The Capital and Coast District Health Board has not ruled out a new hospital, and in a statement says it's looking at options for a mini hospital that provides GP and hospital care. The petition has been accepted by local MP Chris Farfoy and is now before a select committee. Ko Miriana Johnson Tēnei.
Donald Trump has declared there's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. He's now back in Washington after his Singapore summit, and he says his meeting with Kim Jong-un was a truly historic event. His Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in Seoul beginning talks with South Korea and Japan about the details of the process of denuclearization. He spoke to reporters just a couple of hours ago.
The President's summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un 2 days ago does indeed mark a turning point in the U.S.-North Korea relationship. Kim Jong-un's public commitment to completely denuclearize is an important step towards bringing lasting peace and stability to Northeast Asia and indeed to the entire world. President Trump has also made it clear that if Kim Jong-un denuclearizes, there is a bright future for North Korea and its people. We envision a strong, connected, secure, and prosperous North Korea that is fully integrated into the community of nations. Kim Jong-un indicated in Singapore that he shared that vision. We are eager to see him take the next steps to achieve it because the United States is ready for a new chapter in our history.
That's the latest US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. So while the aspirational words continue, the fallout from this week's summit continues, with many across Asia expressing surprise at Mr. Trump's move to cancel military exercises with South Korea. The BBC's John Sudworth reports.
In North Korea, most of the information-starved masses had heard nothing about the summit until today. It is, of course, being sold to them as a great victory. Donald Trump is halting the US-South Korean joint military exercises, the newsreader says. The suspension of the drills, for so long such a key feature of America's alliance with South Korea, appears to have taken many in the region by surprise, not least South Korea itself. The Japanese defense minister made his concern clear today.
The drills and the US military stationed in South Korea play a vital role in East Asia's security.
But back on the ground after his flight home from the Singapore summit, Donald Trump was on Twitter again. There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea, he said. And yet, having criticised his predecessors for being outplayed, the deal Mr. Trump has signed is just as vague as any that have gone before, and he appears to have given up so much more. Across Asia and beyond, there's a sense of people wondering what on earth just happened. Rather than concern, though, here in Beijing, the surprise is one of delight. China has long argued for a suspension of those military exercises, although you have to wonder whether it ever thought it would get it. At a stroke, the old geopolitical certainties have been turned upside down. In the South Korean capital, there are those who back Donald Trump's faith in Kim Jong-un. We need to show trust and believe in him, this woman says. Some in this region will want a lot more detail before they're convinced this really is a formula for peace.
John Sudworth reporting there. That's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for tuning in or streaming us or however you get in touch with us. And thanks for your feedback too. We do like getting that. You can catch all our stories tonight and all our stories from any other program on rnz.co.nz. And you can check out our Facebook page as well. From me, Alex Perrottet, and the Checkpoint team, have a great night. Ka kite.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Attorney-General says Winston Peters' suing of top public servants and National Party MPs is protecting democracy against skullduggery. The Pike River Recovery Agency is confident of getting into the mine's drift later this year using one of 3 re-entry options. The row over Shane Jones' stinging attack on Fonterra and its chair is escalating. And Auckland's Mayor is promising to cooperate fully with the Ombudsman investigation into the release of a report on a downtown stadium. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Mycoplasma bovis has spread from one end of the country to the other, destroying livelihoods.
If this is what's affected my calves and my life, it just destroys me.
And testing the ability of those in charge to respond.
We just want MBI to act swiftly. You've made a call, kill the
This week on Insight, Conan Young investigates if